G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic Friday. You've had a great week and your weekend is looking fantastic. Now, I am trying a different microphone out today overhead, so if it sounds terrible, I apologize in advance, but we may see if this will work. I think my other microphone is on its way out. Now, today, as always, we do have a lot to talk about. We need to look at some maps and where troops had either been surrounded or could potentially still be surrounded. So we'll look at that. That follows on from what we spoke about yesterday of where I've been pointing out for the last week of some areas of extreme danger of encirclement have then been. We need to look at some confirmed Iskander strikes as well as some information that I've been passed off the ground that links in with the information I was passed off the ground yesterday in Kharkiv that matched up differently with the numbers that were then released. I have a folder here named If It Looks Dumb, but if it works, then it's not dumb. These are weapon systems of which we're seeing on the battlefield or weapon systems we're seeing used in then a different way. And then if it works, it's not dumb. We need to look at Chinese and Russian bombers, and then we need to talk about hybrid warfare, the warfare that is going on, I guess you could call it behind the scenes by Russia and China and other nations, and where this war is then having success and where the victories are, as this is incredibly important, not only for this conflict, not only the conflict then between Israel, Gaza, but the rest of the world and the future as well. And we also need to look at something I've been sent from a friend of mine agreeing with a mutual friend of ours, someone who's not public but incredibly knowledgeable for the bits we are then talking about. So let's strap in. I don't know the order we're going to do it yet, but we'll fast and loose. So I agree with your point about not being wiped out is a victory in itself. Now, this is something I have said for a while now, is people have this idea that if Ukraine gave up even an inch of land, that would be a failure and it would be then a Russian victory. Now, that has been pushed by politicians and generals and massive accounts on Twitter and everything. I vehemently disagree with this. If we were to go back before the 24th of February 2022, I believe most people would have seen if Ukraine can hold on to any amount of ground, if a nuclear superpower such as Russia invade, that would then be a victory. And I believe that is still where it is. If Ukraine can hold on to 80% or more of their land, yes, it's going to be a hit, but many, many people around the world, including advisors in the US, they were looking at only a few days or a few weeks that Ukraine would be completely then occupied. Now, a mutual friend of ours and himself said at the start, this will end at the Dnieper, being the Dnieper River. Ukraine has surprised me already. I think that yes, losing the resources in the occupied territories will hurt, but they have lost some now devastated areas with large Russia-centric populations. It would be hard to take them back. They need to dig geographic boundaries. Now, one thing we have spoken then about is the areas that have been taken have been devastated. So fighting back through that devastation is incredibly difficult. There's not much area to have cover. It's exactly what we've seen, say, in Krinky. But we've also said that there's no large examples of where Ukraine has yet fought or liberated any areas that have a majority Russia-centric population. Now, you may point to town, but I'm referring to areas like Sevastopol or Donetsk, and how that would actually then affect the war if the civilians themselves on large are not standing with them then either. That would massively then affect how the war and that battle would go. But at this point, they need to dig geographic then boundaries, and we'll show up a couple of different maps here that then he has drawn up and then sent across, just then rough for me. So we get these blue and then red lines. This is Dnipro, and then to Kharkiv, and then of course this is where Donetsk sits. This is Tokmak. So if you get an idea, you can sort of draw in where the front line is sitting. We'll look at then Bakhmut as well. Now, let's bring this one up as well. Example, dig the red line. So there's a large ditch between Ukraine and Russia. So a literal physical geographic boundary, and then you fortify it hard. You fortify then the blue line so that the armed force of Ukraine can form up behind it when needed and counter-attack. So you've got an area of which they are then behind where the actual boundary is, and then you can push forward out of this and then attack if Russia then try and cross that physical massive ditch boundary. And you can see on the second map here how he's done this from Kyiv all the way, a little bit of border with Belarus, all the way with the border then with Russia. But of course, having that area to then have then the reserves backwards as well. Now, on this, he's drawn where then the front line and where this red then physical border would sit, as well as areas of which you would have reserves in place ready for a counterattack if needed. So I think that is a very interesting point to then look at as well. Now, he went on another point as well, and me and him talk mostly about asymmetric hybrid warfare due to his then experience. But he also commented on what I've spoken about, radicalized groups in Ukraine, that if Ukraine do then have some level of land concession, we know that there are incredibly nationalistic, radicalized groups in Ukraine. By ideology, we're not sure what would then happen there. Could there be some level of civil unrest? We do not know. Or will they just not stop fighting then Russia, which would then go against any treaties or plans that would be put forward in that then agreement? How would that look for EU, NATO membership? We don't know. But he says Ukraine would do well to tell them, hey, support is going. If you demand the 91 borders, we need some decisive victories. We need you to go all out, penetrate the Russian line, make some gains so we can have better negotiating position. Worst case, they get smashed and the radicals' issues is reduced. Best case, you get a better negotiation position. In both cases, it's likely those screaming hardest for the continuation of the war will see how difficult that is to facilitate. So I then see how this could be a plan. Let me know what you think of then what my friend has then sent across. Now, we have seen there has been a multi-billion-dollar accounting error out of the Pentagon again. Now, in Australia, it is tax time, and if you get $20 wrong, you're going to be in a world of hurt, but not if you are then the government. The US Department has identified another $2 billion worth of accounting errors in its estimations of military aid sent to Ukraine. This comes after the past 2 years we've had then a $6.2 billion and then additional errors bringing the total up to $8.2 billion. So now over $10 billion has been found in accounting errors. Now, this is not accounting errors. This is smart accounting. The Pentagon has struggled to accurately estimate the cost of defense articles shipped to Ukraine. So what they're doing, they're going back through then the accounting because of the Presidential Drawdown Authority and have gone, right, how much was this Humvee actually estimated worth at, let's say, in the money they give, they put a Humvee at $50,000. They went, fuck it, mark it as $200, and then they find that money. A lot of the problems in this was they were actually putting down the replacement cost of vehicles. So, you know, of course, Humvees aren't in service anymore. You're having more of these protected mobility MRAP type vehicles, of course, much more expensive. So the replacement of that 5-seater Humvee is then this $3 million truck, and that $3 million is then getting added on. Now, there's this idea that every cent spent on this is kept in America. That is untrue. Also is untrue is every dollar spent on this is sent straight to Ukraine. That is also untrue. It's a little bit 50-50 and likes to be pushed around by whichever side someone is pushing. Now, a lot of the money is going into American businesses to make weapons or to pull out old stock to send to Ukraine. Does that, of course, mean every cent is kept in America? No, it doesn't, because if that vehicle is then going to then America or going to Ukraine, or pieces that are within that vehicle are being bought externally, if something has a Thales system in it, it's coming from Australia or X other millions of different parts, they're coming from other countries. So, of course, no, not every dollar is kept there. Is it like you're rounding up then $10 billion and shipping just $10 billion in cash to Ukraine? No, that's not happening then either. Let's be realistic about how things then are working. So let's look then at some strikes, then we'll do maps, and then we'll do the new vehicles, or at least implementation of vehicles we then see differently. So yesterday I reported that someone in Kharkiv sent me 5 Iskanders have already hit so far. That was the total amount. Here said our volunteer bases were hit, 3 totally destroyed, and now we can't provide assistance to the civilians that we need to. Now we get a little bit more footage of some of these Iskander strikes as well, targeting a plant in Kharkiv. Now, a lot of T-series tanks from the Soviet Union were built and repaired as well in Kharkiv, and that has, at least the repairs has continued on as well, although, and I've driven past then these factories. I'll show you then where it is. We used to go to the service station, the fuel station on the corner near here. So it's just in here. You can see some of the vehicles sitting out here. Some of these are completely useless scrap parts then anyway, but you can have a look at where then this is out in the open here. But that Russia has then targeted this with Iskanders. Now, you can see on some of the roofs here as well that there has definitely been previous strikes. So you can see T-62s, T-72s, and you can also see some being brought back in as well or being taken out. So there's definitely still useful parts here or some level of repair going on as well. So you can see then this is a Russian drone identifying then the vehicles in here. You can see that there are flatbed trucks moving some of these vehicles either in or out. And then you can see where there has been then a strike here, get the camera on, and you can see that there's previously definitely been something on this vehicle from on this building from then an earlier date. So we get more footage here from a second drone. You can see this is the hole. Well, you can see this is the hole in the roof that we were speaking about. You can see vehicles here, potentially repair workshop. That is what people are saying it then is. And you will then see strikes down in here. And then we'll continue later on into the footage, and then you can see over this same area, then you can see a cluster munition strike as well. So let's continue onto the maps and have a look at what is changing. So of course, here is Ukraine, the center, then the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the area we have to come down into straight away is then the Avdiivka front. Now you will see that there has been significant change on then this map today, then significant change then yesterday as well, and then back then to here. So this is where the map was when we last spoke. And what I said was this area in here, if this isn't grey, if it's grey and there's guys in here, this is in real trouble. If not, it's probably closed up as red, as we have seen this growing over the past few days. Now, later on in the day, then we got this. So we had a piece of grey zone with a complete then Russian encirclement then looking on this map. Now, the deep state has then spoken about the situation of what occurred down in here. At night, the fighters of the 31st managed to break out of the encirclement. So they were encircled. Yesterday was an extremely dynamic and intense day north of Prohez. Around 1400, as predicted, a number of observation posts, the 1st and 3rd battalions, were completely surrounded. The brigade commander never gave the order to break through, so the personnel who were in that area confronted him with the fact that the boys would break through with a fight. With the help of coordinated actions of artillery, air reconnaissance and related forces, as well as the control of officers on the ground, and the guys from the 1st and 3rd battalions were able to break out of the encirclement in full force. It was a very nervous and difficult operation. A delay of at least a couple of hours could lead to a second ring of encirclement. There was no need to explain how many informational reasons Russian propaganda would have received. The most important thing is the fighters are alive and continue to restrain the enemy. 31 of 47 remain on the main pillars of defense in that area. Now, one thing I will say is typically the offensive force will have larger losses and need larger numbers. That said, it is in retreat when you can be completely decimated as well. So this, again, not 100% sure what happened in here, but we have from deep state who have ties with the MOD saying that there were fighters then encircled in here and they managed to then break out as well. So this incredibly tense situation. You can see then the amount of ground that was probably made in here too. Now, what I'm saying is a lot of this ground here was probably made from other reserves being pulled in, or at least artillery then being retasked to try and support this element to then get out, causing the loss then of other areas. So this tree line probably had defensive positions. what I'm suggesting is there may have been a movement out to support then a critical withdrawal in here. And this is not the first time in this sector that we have seen encirclements. It sounds like this one, they may have got away with it. We know around the air defense base in Avdiivka, guys didn't. Then we step up then to today and we see further expansion out to the west of Vovchi towards Vasily, as well as this part then being closed in, and a further westwards push then towards Pokrovsk, expanding the control out of here through urban centres like we have spoken then about, and following then the train line down here, but also control of this road. Now, what I've been told about this road is the Russians won't want to shell it themselves because it is a high quality road. Vehicles can move very quickly down it. And at this point, Ukraine won't want to shell this part of it because they're using this as well. But of course, this expansion out west puts pressure then on everything south of here as well. And we saw that then yesterday, if we click this back on, then further expansion south out of Novoselivsky, Persha as well, putting pressure on these open then centres. So what exactly happened in here? What failures occurred this to happen? I don't know, but I know you and I have been speaking about this for an amount of time, for at least a week or so. This area down in here, go back through the videos, we've been saying that there is a big threat of then this happening. It looked like then it did happen, and hopefully the guys got out in the majority with then their lives. So let's have a look and compare then the maps and what has happened in here. So we have a couple of maps to look over then today. Now, Syriac maps, let me move this across. Situation, Osheretny front. This is then the same front here. You can see where then the railway runs down here. Look, showing very, very similar. Actually showing less to the west of this road here, running north here, than the deep state is showing. Situation, Osheretny front. Russian army entered the locality of Vovchi, captured most of it. In addition, troops advanced 2 kilometers west of Prohez, reaching the southern outskirts of Ivanivka. Meanwhile, Russian forces continue increasing the area around, I can't pronounce this correctly, from north to south. So around here, increasing that, as well as pushing then near Vesely too. So we can confirm there's been a large advancement occur here. Now, I know people go, well, this isn't a large advancement because I can't see it from space. Again, in a war of attrition where the war has been stagnant or net zero for 12, 18 months, these are large advancements. And what I say is, if it was being done the other way, people would be calling collapse large as well. So we need to add A and B the same then amount. So this was actually interesting as well. After today's advances, the distance from Russian troops to the front line from Osheretny to Pokrovsk is less than the distance to then Avdiivka. So what he is saying is that since the fall of Avdiivka then earlier this year, that the Russians are actually closer now to Pokrovsk. I can't use this here. So let's say 20 Ks, then they actually are from then Avdiivka, which is true. If you go center, I guess, to center, it's very close. So they've actually made it more of the distance to here than they've made then throughout the year from, of course, the 14 line. And this front is then continually then expanding. Now, Noel reports he also has then his map up here today. So let's then have a look. Now, he also points out that there was a Ukrainian pocket in here too, but he's not showing anywhere near the amount of ground towards Vesely that either of them the other maps are showing. So let's have a look at some other areas as well. Now, we spoke about then far up in the north that nothing has been shown changing on these maps, but there has been a lot of talk that Russia took back areas in Hluboko by Surak, but we did say wait to confirmation of another, say, a pro-Ukrainian map to confirm this. Noel reports today then has this map and will take this then as a confirmation. So see this road comes, where this road comes, shown grey zone deep state. This is the sort of, not as much, but it shows in the same direction that Syriac map showed that Russia had an advancement back in here too. So pushing back on where Ukraine is having then their offensive action. So that is interesting to have a look at as well. Now, while we come down and we've been talking about the Avdiivka front, let's then not forget, and we'll talk about then the New York front, New York Toretsk front in here, as there has been some advances and some changes. So back on the 25th, we see this advancement out to the west, further expanding and fattening that then sausage that is moving out. And then we move up then to the 20, if it'll come forward. Oops, sorry. Then we move up to then the 26th, and we see that this has expanded slightly further. There's also some changing in grey zone around Zalizny as well, indicating there has been some level of movement or less control. Now, let's then look over the Syriac map at what then he is showing in here, showing out to the west in this area, the same amount of where we're talking about then the fattening. Now, we talked about in Zalizny, there was some grey zone shift. This is what I'm talking about right there. Let's have a look here. Now, he is showing where this grey zone shifted is then red. And if we have a look where the grey on deep state is sitting, basically exactly where the red is sitting then on Syriac. So very interesting to know. What we can confirm by that is there was at least some movement. Has that been able to held, or is it just contested? That is where the question lies, but we know there has been definitely some movement. Now, I don't think there's been any shift shown down on these maps, no, but let's come then into Krasnohivka in here. As we know, Russia has been having successful advancements through here, indicated by all maps, and today Syriac is showing this, of course, not shown on the deep state. You can see that in the northeast of Krasnohivka, shown significantly different, shown basically where then the grey zone is. But he's saying, situation west of Donetsk city, during the last 5 days, Russian army advanced northwest of Krasnohivka, making the situation of Ukrainian army in the central part of the town very difficult. The withdrawal towards the northern district begun, so that Ukraine is withdrawing out of here as then Russia is pushing. Now, let's move our way south. No changes shown through here. Again, Robotny, the area where these maps look so different, and we have spoken about the losses for the counteroffensive in here. The informational gain or loss may not be worth the update on this map. That is what I've been saying for a while. Again, not sure, because what we do know is there are many geolocations that show significantly different to deep state. Now, let's have a look at where then this is showing today. So what we get these two paddocks here. We get these skinny long ones, we'll call it. So he is saying just up, see where my cursor is, just up in here, that there has been a Russian advancement. But while we're here, let's have a look at how different then these maps are looking. So this is the road that then turns out to the northwest, and all of this is showing then under Russian control. Remember, it was right out in about where my cursor is, where we saw then that Russian troop get shot on the ground too. So again, the map in here is showing significantly different. I believe the grey zone in here is probably then red, at least by the geolocations confirmed areas, then we know. But how long can then these Russian advances then continue on? We know that the weather is incredibly hot now, but it's also going to get incredibly cold towards the end of the year, potentially slowing things down, as we have seen in both previous years. So, a brigadier general in the Ukrainian army then has said this in an interview. How do you generally assess the situation at the front? It's hard, but the enemy's offensive capabilities are not limitless. And how many losses they will suffer, I think another month or a half, I think a month and a half, and they will not be able to conduct active assaults in many directions at once, and will be on the defensive in any case. And during this time, we need to form our divisions and prepare them. Yes, this is war. Now, what we have spoken about is, I don't know if Ukraine want to get Russia in a complete defensive position. The amount of defensive lines in here, that breakthrough is going to be incredibly difficult. What we've spoken about is it better for Ukraine to slightly step back, so Russia's always coming forwards but inflicting large losses, and pull them into ground that is better for them to fight in? Again, not sure. What we spoke about down in Krasnohivka, we see that then failed assault and many vehicles get taken out. I just can't see in an attritional, dug-in trench warfare like this that large amounts of ground can be made any other way than knowing you're going to have huge losses to get any amount of ground. That yes, you may have then reconnaissance elements and elements come and do some SF missions, but as far as getting your artillery, getting your tanks, getting your main fighting force forward is going to be incredibly difficult. Now, I can't show this, but we'll put it on then the Telegram, but we actually then see that Russian troops, Russian DRG troops who are sabotage, assault, reconnaissance groups, are trying to get more of a foothold in the islands then between the left and right bank of Kherson, and are hit by drones. And this is something, and it confirms what I've been speaking about, is how difficult a waterway like this is with drones, with thermal, with the amount of observation to move absolutely anywhere. And this is small amounts. Imagine if you were trying to move barges and tanks and artillery across here. I think this border across here is going to be incredibly difficult to try and have a move to the right bank or a move to the left bank for anyone here, just for how defensible that is. But it also comes into why then Krinky was so hard to hold, but also the giving up Krinky was such a big deal, but more so Russia losing this territory across on the right bank, I believe was the largest tactical loss or strategic loss that Russia has actually had in this. I think they'll trade half of this for all of what they lost up here. So the not dumb, but if it works folder. So we then see a Zala drone, or actually while we're in this area, we'll look at then the geolocation of this. And this has been geolocated by EJ Shahid, who I use then a fair bit. So this is down in Kherson region over the Ukrainian-controlled territory here. But we see a Ukrainian drone with then a stick on it, doing a bit of the old stick in the bicycle spokes. So from this footage, it doesn't actually show what becomes of the drone after, if it was taken down successfully or not. But this last hit is pretty large right here. That stick bang in there. So we're not 100% sure, but again, if it looks dumb but it works, it's then not dumb. And this is no different from then maybe the Bliatmobiles, the house tanks, or then motorcycles at the front. Now, I don't think motorcycles at the front are silly at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't see every military in the world currently looking at electric bikes, electric motorbikes, and scooters as well. But what we can see on this one is that they have then put this smoke system on the back of it here too. Now, this is to create some sort of smoke screen like they would have on a tank. Now, a lot of older T-series tanks, they actually drip oil into the diesel to create a heap of smoke. That's how the smoke screen works as far as I'm aware, but to try and hide from drones. Now, a drone coming then on the back side of this could actually work. It could really screen where exactly you are through the really poor quality of the analog or digital goggles you wear for FPV drones. And you can see him then doubling back here. Again, could definitely have an effect and increase your survivability in such a saturated drone environment. Now, this is very interesting too, that in Istanbul, a jet ski laden with electric equipment and seeming to be explosives has washed up then ashore. Now, this is a Ukrainian jet ski drone boat that we've seen then used a lot. This is different to the Magura V5, more rudimentary version of what the Magura V5 drones are, but would be far cheaper to produce as it is using off-the-shelf recreational parts. Now, if something like this ever washes up and you think something might be explosive, don't touch shit. You can see like the Starlink on top. If something could be explosive, don't fuck around with it because you don't know what anti-tamper measures are on this. But you can see then the camera tied into the steering and basically is just then a jet ski off the shelf, some Sea-Doo or Yamaha or Kawasaki or something, then laden with explosives, cameras, and robotic control. So very interesting to see how rudimentary that one is compared to other ones as well. But I guess if it's a kamikaze, why make it then look pretty? So let's look then at these bombers that have caused quite a stir, but this always causes a stir when people don't realize that this actually happens all the time. But there is something different about this. Now, I don't think people realize too how close America and Russia actually are, that America bought Alaska off Russia. Now, there's two islands called Little and Big Diomede Island, or maybe just Diomede and Little Diomede, and they're only like 2 kilometers apart, and one is Russian, one is American, and it freezes between. So theoretically, you'd be shot, but theoretically, you could actually walk between Russia and America. Anyway, 2 Hornets, 2 F-35s, and 2 F-16s from NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, have possibly identified and intercepted 2 Russian Tu-95 and 2 Chinese H-6 bombers. Russia and China conducted a joint bomber flight that entered Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone, not Alaska's air zone. It's an identification zone of the radar systems there for NORAD. Monitored the H-6 and Tu-95 strategic bombers flying in Alaska's then identification zone on Wednesday. The Russian and PRC aircraft, People's Republic of China, remained in international airspace and did not enter American or Canadian sovereign airspace. The Russian and Chinese activity in the Alaska identification zone is not seen as a threat. Russia flies along here all the time, and there's videos literally of American and Russia pilots waving to each other as then this happens. Or maybe they're keeping up international relations that we get out of Top Gun. Now, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has said this. This is the interesting part. This is the first time that we've seen these two countries fly together. So it's the first time that Russia and China have been together conducting exercise in this area doing this. We know they've conducted exercises around Japan together too, but they didn't enter our airspace. I think the closest point of approach was about 200 miles off our coast. So it still is a very long way away. Again, with the weapon systems that modern bombers then can carry and the interceptors, you do not need to be this close. You're getting this close for saber rattling then only. But this is a very interesting thing to see, especially because China being involved. And that actually leads into then our next part talking about hybrid warfare. And I want to show you then an amount of maps. And I was talking to some of my friends last night, some very knowledgeable guys, some officers, some whatever, about then the British Army has now named then China, Russia, North Korea, Iran as the axis of upheaval. And that is now what they are talking about. But I want to talk about then the hybrid warfare campaign, sanctions, the global south, Israel, how this all then links in. And I've got some notes in here because I always write physical notes when I have a thought about something. And what I like to do in these videos is explore it with a large audience, because how often does someone get to talk to 20, 30, 40,000 people and get their feedback on where you're wrong, where you're right? It's incredibly good to get that for me as well. Now, I think one of the biggest parts of the global south that people don't talk about, because of course the military might is sitting with the West, absolutely, with America, with Europe, with Australia. The military hoorah is there. But one of the primary advantages that the global south has and its allies is that these countries are, a lot of these countries are meeting replacement rates. So let's talk about this, and we'll link this then to the hybrid war. So here is basically sort of the global south. Now, I've drawn in Russia in this as an ally of this. And of course, then we have China, we have Kazakhstan, we have Uzbekistan, we have Africa, we have Brazil, these big hitters in here, of course, India. And I've drawn these in to put Russia in it too. Now, we're going to overlay this with a couple of other maps. Let's overlay then the replacement rate map. Now, you can see that Russia and China are not meeting the replacement rates. But the majority of the global south are. Now, Uzbekistan, they have a very high replacement rate and a very fast-growing economy. And we've seen Russia and Uzbekistan become much closer allies very recently. You can also see countries like Indonesia. You can see India. You can see Africa in here. So this is then interesting to overlay where this is too. Now, the Western countries in here not meeting replacement rate, which is all of Europe, Australia, America, Canada. What I ask here is, what is being done about not meeting replacement rate? Now, what is being done is then immigration. Now, where are the people who are immigrating on the whole, on the majority, where are the people immigrating from to then these countries to try and soften the blow of that replacement rate? On the majority are immigrating from the global south. And what I've spoken about with some people is this can then change the country's demographics over an amount of time that may have then a more friendly outlook towards those countries of which they have come from, and change the demographics to a more friendly outlook on areas within the global south of that immigration as well. And of course, in democratic systems, that affects voting, that affects then the government. And that Russia and China are tying themselves to countries and economies that have then birth rates that are meeting replacement rates when then they are not. And this is going to go a few steps further in this. Now, we are going to overlay a few different maps in here too. So let's look then at, we'll bring up then, oh my God, sorry. So global south, replacement rates. Let's look up then the sanctions. Now, these are the countries that, by Reuters, have sanctioned then Russia. Now, this may have changed since then. This is about 12 months old, but it hasn't changed massively in this either. Now, what you can see is this is overwhelmingly then these Western countries, which are then overwhelmingly the countries then not meeting their said replacement rate. let's then look at the countries that then are arming Ukraine. Again, we see very similar. Then again, it is majority then the West in here too. So this lines up then even with then said replacement rate and meets up with then the sanctions. So the sanctions as well as the armament, of course, these match very, very similar. And then we can overlay this with who signed then the Ukraine communique as well. That what the communique failed to do and what it needed to do was get these countries that are either in then the pinky purple or then the white in this to have to come to the table on this, because we knew the yellow countries in this, we knew that they were all, Australia was going to go and not sign it. Bullshit. Zelensky could have brought anything to the table and Albanese would have signed it. So would have Biden or Kamala or the majority of Europe. So this is interesting to look at, as well as where then this is lining up of who was part of that, who's part of the global south, then who has then sanctioned Russia. So if we line then these two together with each other, again, you can see that the countries that have signed it, they're the countries that have sanctioned, they're the same countries that then are arming. I promise we are getting somewhere on this. This leads into the last part that I want to speak about, is then how the world voted at the UN on the Israel war. Now, the orange is abstain, meaning it's probably a no, but they wanted to have some level of neutrality due to where they are, their area in the world, and blue is yes. Now, straight off the bat, with a few exemptions, but the majority on the whole is lining up with the same countries that are part of the global south, the same countries that are meeting then said replacement, the ones that have not signed then the communique, the ones who are not arming then Ukraine or haven't then sanctioned. And this leads into the point of the hybrid war and why China and Russia are trying to build closer ties and financial dependence on these countries in here as well, then into the future. Now, I just scribbled this down before, that the West has been saying for a long time, especially EU leaders, that they need Ukraine to defeat Russia because they are saying that Russia will not stop at Ukraine, that they'll push into NATO. And I've spoken about how, in a military sense, this doesn't make sense. If Russia had the ability and had the power to push into NATO, Ukraine would be a cakewalk for them, regardless of how much arms we sent in. But what I've scribbled down from some conversations that I had last night was the West is arming Ukraine to try and defeat Russia and demilitarize Russia as much as possible, because we don't know how to stop the success of the hybrid war that Russia is winning at the moment in the global south, and the rise of the global south, and then the populations in those centers too, as ours then decrease. That the idea of if Ukraine fails won't stop Russia does seem ridiculous militarily, but if Russia have a victory for the land, sea, and politics, it does help their rise within the global south, because at the end of this, sanctions will have to be lifted, and if the country is still in a fairly good shape, of course, it has a much better step-off point into then the next stage in the world. And this is because the EU leaders, I think on the whole, and a lot of Western leaders, are threatened by then traditional religious and conservative values. We see this in the US. They're saying democracy is being attacked from these then values. And the hybrid war is actually using these values to push people away from the West as well. And this is a large part, not the only part, but a large part of Russian and Chinese hybrid campaigns. And I think that the idea that they won't stop, it doesn't come from a military sense. It comes from the influence into more liberal countries, from conservative countries. So they won't stop isn't meaning they're going to come through with tanks. It's meaning this hybrid war is going to continue in areas around the world and will swing more people onto their side. That's that they won't stop, and that they'll get more influence in countries like Hungary or Slovakia and maybe grow out from there, or influence around the world in then economies that are rising. And it's very clear that from the people that I've spoken to, the West doesn't know how to stop or slow down these increasing partnerships in the South that are avoiding our influence more and more, and that this hybrid war is currently being won by Russia and China. And of course, India as an involvement party, I will say, in this. Maybe not doing it maliciously, but just look at where India is on a map. It makes sense to conduct large trade with these countries. And of course, India is a massive, massive population. So I just wanted to talk about that here. I probably didn't put it together as well as I want. I'm going to do a specific piece on this, but this is my current cards on hybrid warfare for this war. Currently. So things are coming together, but slowly. Legends, look after yourselves. Have a fantastic day. I hope any of this audio recorded. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.